The World Cup is underway, and there's already been a number of games to remember. But this video is going to be about the most iconic ones that had it all. The drama, the unpredictable results, and pure dedication from the players. But first, we'd like you to answer our question. Who won the biggest number of World Cup trophies as a player? Matthäus, Pelé, Zidane? Leave your answers in the comments. And now we go. Germany-Italy, World Cup 2006, semi-final. In 2006, Italian football was on the verge of a massive decline due to the Calciopoli scandal. Juventus got demoted to the Serie B and stripped of 2 titles. Only a few months later, Buffon, Cannavaro and Del Piero, the Juve leaders, were to represent their country in the World Cup. The defensively solid Italy side were steadily moving towards their goal and eventually faced Germany, the hosts and the favorites in the semi-final. The pressure was on. Both teams tried to be as careful as possible. There weren't that many chances and it was getting more and more tense with every minute. 0-0 was the score at full time, and then, in the overtime, it began. The Italians knew how good the Germans were at penalties, so they switched to attack. Jurgen Klinsmann's side had a chance to finish it all, but Podolski's shot was brilliantly saved by Buffon. And then Andrea Pirlo played his part. 190 minutes in, he passed the ball to Fabio Grosso, who smashed it into the far corner. Just 1 minute later, Italy hit Germany on a counter and Del Piero made it 2-0. The Signal Iduna Park stands were never as silent as they were in that moment. Absolutely heartbreaking.
German dreams of a record 8th World Cup.
Ghana-Uruguay, World Cup 2010, quarterfinal. One of the most controversial World Cup matches of all time. It was never the brightest of posters, and no one ever expected this game to become one of the World Cup classics. It was late into the first half when Solomon Torre opened the scoring for Ghana. Their triumph, however, wasn't meant to last long. 55 minutes in, the World Cup hero Diego Forlan made it 1-1. Ghana were in total control. They had way more chances and made 30 shots. So it wasn't that much of a surprise that they were awarded a penalty in the 120th minute. And what happened next was downright epic. The ball was going in, but Luis Suarez blocked it with his arm and got a red card. Suarez walked away in tears, but turned his head just for a second to see what was going to happen. The Ghana leader Asamoah Gyan came to the spot and hit the bar. It went down to a penalty shootout, and Uruguay were the lucky ones that night. Here's what Luis recalls. They say it was cheating, that handball, but it all started with a free kick for Ghana, which was not meant to be. When the first shot was made, the Ghana player was probably offside. I can't tell for sure, but there was no free kick certainly, and after all, I was never meant to stand on the goal line. My duty was to cover my player, but as the ball flew over, it was natural for me to take a step back and save it. Sometimes I meet people from Ghana in Barcelona and they ask for a photo. They tell me, "You're the guy who handballed it," and love, they hold no grudge. Argentina-England, World Cup 1998, round of 16. The first thing to come to your mind when you hear Argentina versus England is of course the World Cup 86 fixture, but this one was no worse. Though the countries were on better terms compared to the 80s, they were still fierce rivals. That evening went down in history. Only 10 minutes in, it was 1-1 already. Both Batistuta and Shearer scored their penalties. In the 16th minute, young striker Michael Owen scored again for England. This goal is still considered one of the best in the World Cup history, especially in England. But much more was yet to happen. Shortly before the halftime whistle, Argentina equalized. Verón's clever pass found Javier Zanetti. Things were getting more and more heated, and it all exploded early in the second half. Diego Simeone, the provoker, pushed David Beckham, and the Englishman fell down. David in his turn tripped Simeone. The replay showed that it was totally on purpose, while Diego made the best out of it. He fell down, covering his face with his hands and screaming in Spanish, "Oh my knee, my back!" There was no VAR back then. The ref took the bait and showed a red card to Beckham. England managed to hold on until the penalty shootout, but lost. and David Beckham suddenly became a scapegoat. I had to face animosity when I was back in England. When you have to do with such things, you can't help but start doubting yourself despite all the support you have. Such things are those you want to erase from your life. I would like to forget everything my family and I had to go through during the 4 years that followed that World Cup. I couldn't change a thing, however. I didn't need to. I just kept playing. Uruguay-Brazil World Cup 1950 Final. The post-war World Cup featured one of the most fascinating games of all time, Uruguay and Brazil. These two teams had hated each other since the very first World Cup in 1936, and this game made their rivalry even more intense. The Brazilian media had been buzzing about the tournament even before it started. Winning the trophy was a must for Brazil. It was a very unusual tournament. Europe was yet to recover from the war, so many teams refused to participate, among them England and the socialist countries such as the USSR and Hungary. The rules were different too. The group stage was followed by the final round. There was where the champion was to be decided. The final was Uruguay versus Brazil, with more than 199,000 fans watching from the Maracanã stands, which is still the world record. Everybody was sure Brazil would win. They found the opening early in the second half, but then all of a sudden conceded 2 goals in the 66th and the 97th minute. Alcides Gigia, who scored the second goal, would later say, "Only 3 people managed to silence the Maracanã: the Pope, Frank Sinatra, and me." The defeat was a shock for all the Brazilian nation. Cases of suicide became more frequent all over the country. Here's what the FIFA president Jules Rimet said about that evening. "There were no celebrations, speeches or anthems. Nothing. I was standing amid the crowd with the trophy in my hand. Luckily, Varela, the Uruguay captain, was standing near me, so I quickly shook his muscular hand as if furtively and handed the trophy to him. I couldn't say a word. Everything was envisaged, but not Uruguay's triumph." Hungary-Uruguay World Cup 1954 Semi-final. Another Uruguay game in our list. This team is all about playing iconic matches. Nothing we can do about it. In 1954, 4 years after that very final against Brazil, Uruguay reached the semi-final and had to face Hungary, led by Ferenc Puskás himself. That Hungary team was considered the best ever, while the Uruguayans were yet to suffer their first World Cup defeat. Hungary were in control and leading 2-0 75 minutes in. It looked like it was over for Uruguay. But then heavy rain started. It made things harder for Hungarians as they couldn't play their football anymore, and that was what Uruguay needed. Juan Holberg scored twice and sent the game into overtime. He couldn't play on, however, as he was so overwhelmed with emotions that he fainted and needed a hard massage to regain consciousness. Uruguay had a chance to make the most iconic of comebacks, but the ball got stuck in the mud right on the goal line after Schiaffino's shot. He got injured at that very moment, and then the Hungarians found their second wind, and the legendary striker Sandor Kosic scored 2 goals. But despite all the tension, the footballers embraced each other when the game was over. It was a great show, which made history for everyone involved. West Germany-France World Cup 1982 Semi-final. There were 2 teams to represent the divided Germany at that time: West Germany, FRG, and East Germany, GDR. GDR didn't really win anything significant, while FRG was in fact the ancestor of the current Bundesteam and its traditions. The iconic game against France took place in the World Cup 1982 semi-final. Germany had a good start and opened the scoring in the 17th minute. 10 minutes later, Platini made it all square from the spot. The moment of controversy happened in the 60th minute. Patrick Battiston was brutally tackled by the German goalkeeper Harald Schumacher. The Frenchman passed out, lost 2 teeth and had 3 ribs broken, and his spine damaged, while Schumacher got away with that and no foul was given. That episode was the most memorable thing about that game, though the overtime was a joy to behold. France made it 3-1, but then the Germans made it 3-3, and on penalties reached the final. Germany-Brazil World Cup 2014 Semi-final. A lot was expected from Brazil, led by the brilliant Neymar in the home World Cup. It was meant to become a true football carnival, though thousands of Brazilians were taking part in the protests. They didn't want their country to host the World Cup due to economical problems. As for the Seleção, their path ended up being a disgrace. Brazil had to play Germany without Neymar, who was injured, and Thiago Silva, who was suspended. It seemed that they still had a chance, and surely nobody expected Brazil to be trailing 5-0 by the 30th minute. The Germans were stomping the hosts. The crying faces of Brazilian fans were seen all over the stadium, but the Bundesteam showed no mercy. 7-1. This game was not only about the heartbreak, it was the biggest ever defeat for Brazil, which ended their streak, 62 home games without a defeat. And apart from that, this match became the highest-scoring fixture out of all the World Cup finals and semi-finals. Brazil-Italy, World Cup 1982, second round. Even though it was just the second group stage fixture, this game is one of the World Cup classics. The Italian Paolo Rossi scored a hat-trick, while the mighty Brazilians with the likes of Socrates, Zico and Falcao were eliminated. That was the game to determine the further development of football. Brazil's attack, which had already won 3 World Cups, was completely neutralized by the Italian Catenaccio. That pretty much marked the switching from attacking to more defense-minded football, and it happened right after the tournament was finished, as Italians, the winners, became the trendsetters. A well-known journalist, Tim Vickery, wrote, "The physical development of the game, it was thought meant the traditional methods had to be revised. Brazilian players had to bulk up. Rubens Minelli, the most successful domestic coach of the 70s, wanted his team to be made up of 6-footers, and with less space on the field, the future of football lay in the counter-attack rather than elaborate attempts to pass through midfield. Had Brazil won the trophy in 1982, the team would be more than a fond memory. They might be the blueprint for future sides, because winners are always copied." Italy-West Germany, World Cup 1970, semi-final. This semi-final is called the Game of the Century. Italy were the favorites and found the opener only 8 minutes in. The Germans had to wait until their final attack to make it 1-1 and send the game into overtime. And then, a complete chaos. The German leader Franz Beckenbauer broke his collarbone, but his team had no substitutions left. He had to play on with his arm in a sling. In the overtime, 5 goals were scored, from the 98th to the 111th minute. The players' tiredness is believed to be the reason for that. That World Cup took place in Mexico, so the players were exhausted after having played 90 minutes in such hot weather. The hero of that game was the Italian Gianni Rivera, the one to score a winner. Another player to go down in history was the goalkeeper Enrico Albertosi, who put his gloves off because of the heat and made 2 brilliant saves in overtime with his bare hands. Here's what Helmut Schön, the German coach, said: "We conceded goals when we believed the game was in our hands. The last goal especially. We were punished for being overconfident. Still, I would like to praise my players. Not every team would handle playing 2 120-minute games of such intensity in 4 games." Italy lost to Brazil in the final, while West Germany won against Uruguay and got the bronze. But it was the semi-final that became the reason to remember that World Cup. Argentina-England, World Cup 1986, semi-final. This game made the world talk about Diego Maradona. The Argentine had not one, but 2 most iconic moments. The hand of God is the first one. Diego jumped and scored with his arm. The referees didn't see the fall and the goal was counted. Only a few minutes later he scored again, the goal of the century, as he got the ball in his own half and dribbled past the whole England team. Gary Lineker scored in the 81st minute, but that was no more than a consolation goal. Argentina went through and won the final, and Maradona became the idol. Politics is what also made that victory extremely significant. It was Argentina's revenge for the lost Falkland War. Here's what Diego said: "We, Argentinians, didn't know what the military was up to. They told us that we were winning the war, but in reality England was winning 20-0. It was tough. The hype made it seem like we were going to play out another war. I knew it was my hand. It wasn't my plan, but the action happened so fast that the linesman didn't see me putting my hand in." The referee looked at me and he said, "Goal." It was a nice feeling, like some sort of symbolic revenge against the English. And now, dear friends, what is the most memorable World Cup match for you? Let us know in the comments. See you soon.